Good morning. Is it a good morning so far? Everybody doing okay? Awesome. Well, we are going to do a little more music on the back end. We tend to do that during our services where we do the communion experience just to give us some back end time for reflection. So people are going to continue to come in. Just come on in, have a seat. I'm glad that you're here today, and whatever your thing is, you're here from out of town, you're here because you're always here, you're here because you lost a bet to the pastor. I mean, whatever the reason is that you're here, I'm glad that you're here, and I want to encourage you, especially as we begin kind of this new fall season here at Epic, I want to encourage you to lean into what God's up to around here, and you'll have all kinds of opportunities to do that, and just like Tim said, we would love for you to stay around for the 1.0. About 30 people who are new to our church have already signed up for that. If you've never been a part of that or just looking for a free lunch, no, if you've been a part of that, don't come for the free lunch. But we've got extra food, and so we're going to give away Tim's burrito first. And if there's a couple extras of you, we'll give away mine, or at least half of it, eventually. We'll fight over it, but I just want the part with the extra steak. And so you can have the rest. Glad that you're here. A couple of new things going on that don't take place in this room, but I want to let you know about because they don't take place in this room. A couple of things. One is our kids ministry has their big transition day today. And so those that have been in the baby, like 0 to 2 room, they're now moving into 2 to 5-year-old room. And so that's a big deal. And then our 2 to 5-year-old kids that are just hitting 5 and going into kindergarten, they're moving into the kindergarten to 5th grade room. And so not only am I a pastor here, but I have 3 boys, and my youngest is making the big church transition today. And then our last child starts school tomorrow. So we're pretty emotional over that. I mean, most of us are like, yes! But super emotional. Remember, emotional can be more than just crying. He's ready, okay? Before you're like, bad dad. No, we're just getting him ready for when the natural times in life occur that he's ready to move on to the next thing. When you're 18 and graduate from high school, this is not your home anymore except for holidays and and the summer if you're working, for us at a discounted rate. So that's happening tomorrow. But today for our church, that's a big transition. And then a new thing for those of you that are new to Epic, or maybe just forget the history. It's a short history. Our church, we've been around 2.5 years exactly, basically today, and we've been in this building 2 years today. And what we're doing for the first time ever in our history as a church is we're launching a brand new middle school group right now at this hour. And so if you're a middle school student, you may actually exit the room. They're probably more interesting up there than I will be today. But if you have middle school kids in your family, if you have neighbors who are middle school kids, for the first time ever, we're offering something exclusively at the 11 o'clock hour upstairs for 6th to 8th grade students. And so we'd love for you to bring them, and let's see how that thing can get launched with a lot of strength. And I just want to say to families, we're finally at a point where we think we can do this. At least we're going to go for it. So here's what our vision is around here if you're new to the Epic scene. Our vision is to see more and more people really begin to orient their entire life around Jesus. Because what we believe is that following Jesus isn't something that means just particular things for our Sunday or for our small group hour during the week. We believe that if we're going to follow Jesus, it has something to do with how we do marriage or friendship. We believe it has something to do with how we do our jobs, how we interact in our neighborhood. And what the big idea of today is this: if we're going to orient our entire lives around Jesus, then that must include seasons and times when things aren't going like we wish they were going. It must include times. If it's an entire life kind of thing, then this Jesus and following him thing must be for times when our relationships are struggling rather than thriving. It must be for times when our bank accounts are empty rather than full. It must be for times when the doctor gives us a report that's the opposite of the report we were hoping for. It must be for times when things at work aren't exactly as they promised us they would be. Anybody ever experienced that? If you'll just come over here, we're going to do this and this and this, and you're like, nope. But they've got you now, okay? I know how that is. But what I want to do today is to see if we might be able to discover a Jesus who's worth following even when everything isn't going our way. And right now in our church, just keep making room for people as they come in. This is fun. You're right on time. In In our church right now, there are a number of people, and these are just stories that I know, going through some just crazy, crazy things in our congregation right now. There are about 300 people that come to Epic on a weekly basis, and just in our congregation, some major, major things, marriages and relational challenges that would be hard to believe, medical challenges, even for people in this room that are extremely sad, but we're not without hope, thankfully. A number of people in our church who are unemployed and just can't get a lead for whatever reason right now. And so this is a very present thing, but this isn't just a message for those people, because here's the deal. The question for us in this room is not if we will face kind of challenging storms in life. The question is just when. Right? We've all lived long enough to know, and we all have it to different degrees, but the question is just when. When is it our turn to experience something? When is it our turn to go through something that we would never want to go through in a million years? Because my turn has come, and yours has come, and our turn's coming again. And some of you are sitting right in the midst of the storm, but this is for all of us today. And so I wonder if there's some hope that we might be given by God in it, because the question's not if, the question is when. And the secondary question to the when question is, when that does come, will our faith be able to sustain us? And here's what I want to say. If not, I think we should walk away from the faith altogether. Because the reality is, your faith is awesome when the bonus comes in, right? Your faith is awesome when you get a healthy pregnancy. My faith is awesome when my kids are healthy, right? But could it be possible that our faith in Jesus could remain present even when favorable circumstances are absent? Say it again. Is it possible that we can continue to have present faith in Jesus even when favorable circumstances are absent? Because here's what tends to happen. We tend to allow our circumstances to inform our assumptions about Jesus. And you see this all the time. Most notably, I see this in social media world and in the sports world, right? Someone that has no faith practice in God at all, they get the bonus check, and all of a sudden on Facebook and Twitter, this is the best day ever, God is so good, right? You've seen this. But not when they get fired. He isn't good, right? Or you see it with athletes, right? Quarterback throws an 80-yard touchdown. But I never see him go that route when he's sacked. What is the deal? Here's the deal. When all is well, your faith is awesome. And so is your pastor's. But when things aren't as well as we wish they were, right? The question then becomes, God, are you even present? God, do you even care? God, do I even matter? So what I want to do today is, first of all, say to you, you and I are not the first to assume things about God based on our current circumstances. The disciples did the same exact thing, but there was one encounter I want to show you today, help you see that when they experienced this with Jesus, they left this encounter having their assumptions about God reshaped. No longer were their assumptions about Jesus just tied to the circumstance they found themselves in. And my hope, what I'm really hopeful for today, is that Jesus might reshape some of our assumptions about him. So here's what I want to do. In our entire series called The Kingdom, we've been in the book of Mark. If you have a Bible, would love for you to turn there. If you need a Bible, raise your hand, and we're about to just tell you it's Christmas for you. Free Bibles, raise your hand. You can keep these. These are yours. Mark, if you have a Bible, either on your iPhone, you actually have the hard copy, iPad, Android phone. You've got it memorized, whatever the case may be. Mark is the second book in the New Testament. If you have one of the Bibles that we're passing out right now, we're on page 545. So love for you to turn there, page 545. And we'll be at the end of chapter 4 in Mark. We'll start with verse 35, and we will read till the end. Let me set the stage for you just for a moment so that when we stand up in a moment and I read this to you, you'll have a little bit of context for what's been happening. Here's the story. Jesus is crazy exhausted. He's just worn out. And you're like, Jesus? Yeah, Jesus. You're going to see the fullness of Jesus' humanity in this encounter. Now, that's not going to be all that you see, though, so hang on tight. He's just worn out. Jesus has been healing people. Apparently that takes some strength away. I don't know. He has been teaching to large crowds, and he has been dealing with the opposition from religious leaders of all people. So that might exhaust everyone, right? And so he's exhausted. It's time for him to withdraw. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the concept of Sabbath and how even Jesus himself would withdraw at times when he had been with the crowds. And so he's going to say to his disciples, guys, let's get in the boat. Let's go to the other side. And what looked like it might be a peaceful night actually wasn't. So would you stand with me? Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 35. We'll read through 41, and we'll see if we can learn anything about the kind of assumptions we should make about Jesus based on our circumstances. Mark tells us that on that day when evening had come, Jesus said to his disciples, let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Great question. Who is this? You may be seated. Who is this? Right off the beginning of this experience, I want to bring something to your attention. There are some things in the first few verses of this text that really aren't all that significant. They don't necessarily change the outcome of the story or include the high points of the story. But if you know anything about how Mark's gospel came along, Mark heard from Peter all the details that you see in the book of Mark, okay? So Peter, who was one of the 12 disciples and was one of the inner 3 disciples, along with James and John, Peter informed Mark, and that's how Mark's book came along. That's how this letter came along, that Peter told Mark everything that had happened, and then Mark recorded these things. Now, if you remember what we said in week 1, for those of you that were here, Mark is the shortest gospel. He just includes some major highlights, but in this account, he actually gives us more details than he will give other places. And the reason is not because all of the details he gives in this account are significant on their own, according to the big idea of the story, but he's just trying to give you details he received from Peter that are the kind of details that only a person who was there would know. Does that make sense? So he's trying to really get as much argument and weight behind this. Hey, I want my readers to know, I want my hearers to realize that this thing really happened, okay? Let's look at some of the details that really aren't that significant, except for the fact that they're trying to add weight to the argument. This is significant because Peter was there. In verse 35, it says that evening had come. That's really not going to have anything to do with our application of the story, but he just wants us to know, here's the time that it was. Here's the exact time. It was in the evening. And then in verse 36, it doesn't seem that significant, but it says that the disciples took Jesus with them in the boat just as he was. I don't know how else they would have took him, all right? But he's just wanting you to know that Jesus, whatever he was wearing, whatever he was kind of doing, they took him just as he was in the boat. So just, again, he's trying to say, this thing happened, understand, this really is a factual event. And then it says in the end of 36, other boats were with him. Does not have anything to do with Jesus' point to the disciples. Okay? But he's trying to get weight behind the argument of this took place and this needs to inform our faith. That's what Mark's wanting his readers to do. Mark is not one. I know some of us know people in our lives. We're not pointing to anybody in the room, but some of us know people in our lives that use 5,000 words to tell us what they could have told us in 500 words, right? That's not what Mark's doing, just to get more words in. Or I don't know about you, but when I was in college and I had a paper due, I'm just like, how many words can I come up with to get the minimum page numbers? No one's given Mark that assignment, okay? So the reason he's including these seemingly insignificant details is because he's wanting you to know this thing happened. Like Peter was there. Peter knew it was evening. Peter told me. And then even look at Jesus. The fact that he's asleep, that's significant, okay? That's not part of the insignificant. But the fact that he's asleep on the cushion, like there's obviously just one, that's not that significant other than Peter, because he was there, he was able to tell Mark, and Jesus was asleep on the cushion. Okay? Not sure how that went, if Jesus just pulled seniority on him, or boys, I'm the most tired. While you guys were chilling out, I was the one healing people of diseases. The cushion's mine. Okay? I don't know if that's what happened, but Jesus is asleep on the cushion, and he's so exhausted. And then it says in verse 37 that a great windstorm arose. I rarely do this, but so that we might understand the point, I want to let you know what the actual original language, which is the New Testament, was written in Greek, and the word that described the windstorm, just so you can understand it, is the Greek word seismos. Okay, and if you're in the Bay Area, that ought to mean something to you. What Mark's telling us is that this storm, even though it was on the water, and you would think he might associate with a hurricane type situation, he's letting us know it had earthquake-like impact. Seismos, exactly the way we get our word from, seismograph, seismic, and so that's what Mark's saying to us. Now, what's interesting, before you and I think, oh, I'm sure this was just, some regular afternoon thunderstorm like we had where I grew up. Why couldn't they just get over it? Many of the disciples that are in the boat now with Jesus, they're very experienced fishermen. They are not on the Sea of Galilee for the first time in their lives. They are not seeing any kind of storm for the first time in their lives. And they're not just pansies, okay? They understand how to handle a boat. They understand what it's like to be out on the Sea of Galilee. And because of the the positioning of the Sea of Galilee, I think it was 700 feet below sea level. It was very common for the Sea of Galilee to have all kinds of storms. So these guys had been in storms before, but they had never been in a storm and survived one like this one. And they're freaking out. And Jesus is asleep. He's completely exhausted. He's asleep. And they wake him up and they say to him, Jesus, do you not care that we are perishing? Jesus, do you not care? Jesus, do you not care? You see, the disciples were making assumptions about the love of Jesus based on their current circumstance. And you and I do this all the time. To interpret who God is, we look at our circumstance. In our good months, we think, what about God? Awesome. Great. Love him. Sometimes when the things aren't so great, it's like, God, I don't know. Like, are you even there? And if you're here, do you care? And so they say to Jesus, do you not care? Do you not care? We do not ask this question when things are great. We do not ask Jesus the do you care question when our relationships are flourishing, when we're receiving all of our quarterly bonuses, and when our health record and the health record of our family is as good as it's ever been. We don't ask this kind of question in those moments, do we? We ask this kind of question when we're in over our heads with something. We ask this kind of question when we feel like the thing that's coming down on us is so far beyond our control that it's going to sink us. That's when we ask these kind of questions, and that's the moment that the disciples ask the same kind of question. Do you care? Now, you can tell that they're interpreting this event of what's going on with the storm as Jesus not caring. We'll get to this in a second, but Jesus has a very different perspective about what's happening in this moment. You see what happens with the disciples and Jesus, if you want to know how to frame our understanding of really this encounter, there are three questions. One asked by the disciples, two asked by Jesus. If you're the outline kid in the room, like you need the outline, I'm not a linear thinker, but if you need that, there are three questions, okay? And so I want you to look at those in the text. You can write those down, and I'll chase that for a little bit, kind of what those questions indicate. So they assume that this means Jesus isn't interested. He doesn't care. He doesn't love us. We thought he loved us, but something's going wrong. What's the deal? And it's a question we ask, right? I mean, and it's somewhat of a fair question depending on our experience with God. Let's ask questions like this, and we do this. God, did you not care when we miscarried? God, did you not care when my boss handed me the pink slip? God, did you not care when the woman who said she would love me forever all of a sudden stopped doing so one day? For me, God, did you not care when my own mom died of cancer at the age of 46? And if our circumstances determine who God is, and the only conclusion I could come up with and you could come up with is that there are certain times where absolutely no, God, you don't care. All I'm saying is, you hopefully know where I'm headed, but if the only thing that determines in our hearts and minds who Jesus is our current circumstance, then the only assumption you and I can make is that there have been times in your life and my life, every single one of us, where he absolutely didn't care. But if we don't just look to our circumstances, rather if we look to Jesus to answer this question, our conclusion may be different this morning. So I just want to ask you rhetorically. I don't want you to answer out loud in case you're wrong. But are you only allowing your current circumstance to inform your faith? Or are you allowing who God is, as much as he's revealed himself to you, to inform your faith? And this is something we all battle with. I don't have easy answers for you today, but I do want to give help if I can do so through God's word and what God might begin in our hearts this morning, what he might correct, what he might reshape regarding our assumptions. And so they just like, Jesus, do you care? Now what's interesting is they asked Jesus the question, do you not care? But the first words out of Jesus' mouth aren't to his disciples. Do you see the text? Who does Jesus speak to first? The storm. Specifically, the wind and the waves. They're like, Jesus, do you not care? It's almost like Jesus, they're waking him up in the back. And the question we've got to ask, right, is how did Jesus stay asleep in the storm? Is it his humanity or his divinity, right? Is it his humanity? He's so exhausted. Have you ever been in that moment where you slept through the earthquake? Is he just exhausted, or is it his godlike quality that just allows him to go like, everything's fine? I think you can see in this text it's probably both. Maybe this text, more than any other in the Gospels, till you get to the cross and resurrection, displays in a few short verses the divinity and the humanity of Jesus. He's exhausted. And so they wake him up, and you can imagine all 12 of them, like, I'm sure Peter woke him up. They're like, you touch him. Peter had to be the one that went in first. And they're all around him. They ask Jesus a question, and it seems to me that Jesus looks away from them, although they're desperate. He looks toward the wind and the sea, and he says, psst, stop it. Peace, be still. Enough already. Cease. They say, do you care? Jesus speaks to nature. But then he speaks to them, and he doesn't give them an answer. I love this, and Jesus has really taught me a lot about this. Sometimes we always think we have to answer everyone's question. Jesus rarely answers questions with statements. Oftentimes, he doesn't answer at all, and many times, what does he give back? Question. So they say, here's their perspective, Jesus, do you care? And Jesus is like, what are you afraid of? Now, this seems obvious to me when Jesus asked his first question, why are you so afraid? Isn't it clear? Like, we're not figuratively dying here, Jesus. We're literally dying. Water's filling in the boat. Now, you see other places in the Bible that the disciples weren't the smartest tools. They were uneducated men. But they knew physics, right? So if the water keeps coming into the boat, what do they know that you and I know? We're sinking. So how in the world could Jesus say to them, why are you scared? What causes fear in us? We become fearful when we end up facing something that's going against what we wished was happening, and we have no control over it, right? Because many of us have bought into the illusion of control. When things are going well, we're like, we got this. I'm smart enough. Got enough money to cover it. I'm good on my feet. I'm good socially. I can cover this. The only way, and if you haven't heard anything else, this is the light bulb for me in my own study. It might just be boring to you, but this is helpful for me. The only way Jesus can say to the disciples at a moment like this, and to us in our moments of the storm, why are you so afraid? The only way he can say this is if he's also saying, why are you so afraid? The reason you don't need to be afraid is because I have power over everything that you don't. And the things that are beyond your control aren't beyond mine. Otherwise, he can't ask the question. Say it again. Why are you so afraid? Jesus can only ask that question as if he's stating at the same time through his question, the reason you don't have to be afraid is because everything in the universe submits to me. I know the storm you're in. I know what's going to happen if I don't intervene, but I've got authority over this. I've got authority. It submits to me, and you don't have to be afraid. Now, we know that God doesn't always remove us. You're not going to find this pastor saying today, if you just believe hard enough and throw $1,000 to the church, you will be healed. I mean, we can test that if you guys want to. And so sometimes I think it happens in this life, and sometimes I think we'll experience it for sure in the life to come. But the only way Jesus can say to us in our storm, and it is a violent thing upon them, and some of you have been, are, and will be, all of us will be in the midst of a violent storm like this in a relational, financial, with our kids, whatever the case may be. The only way Jesus can say, why are you so afraid, is if there's good reason for us not to be afraid. And the only way there's good reason for us not to be afraid is if we have a God who can do something about the things that overcome us. Beyond our control, but not beyond his. Otherwise, he can't ask the question. He goes on to ask another question I think answers the fear question. He says, have you still no faith? Have you still no faith? He's saying, what's it going to take? What am I going to have to do? Remember, they've just seen Jesus exercise his authority in healing people, right? And while they've never seen the storm scenario play out, they've seen him, they've heard him speak in a way that no one else has ever spoken and do things in a way that no one else has ever done. And so Jesus is just saying to them, what am I going to have to do before you finally believe? And we want to look at the disciples and just be like, you guys are terrible, right? Like if you were a disciple, it wouldn't take you 12 times, would it? Because you always have great faith in God when he's done something in the past. Think about times in our lives where we've seen God provide, where we've seen God deliver us, where we've seen God rescue. And we were sure in that moment, we were so overwhelmed with gratitude to God. And in that moment, our faith began to be built up. But then we found ourselves 3 months, 6 months, 2 years later in a moment. And even though we saw God do some amazing things and provide some amazing ways for us, for whatever reason, it's not fueled our present or future faith in him at all. And you're just going, what else do I have to do? And I know we're thinking like, we would do it better than the disciples if we had seen all that. Haven't you seen him do some things? Friends, what if we, and this is me, I'm in the boat with you. What if we could come to the place to where we think back about how we've seen him act on our behalf, and that would fuel our faith in him moving forward, no matter what things look like. No matter what things look like. One of the reasons why we should exhibit faith, I think Jesus is saying, is because he obviously isn't freaking out during the storm. It's good to know that God doesn't get nervous when we do, right? He's not phoning a friend, all right? He's not buying like extremely difficult problems for dummies. I mean, he's not doing that, right? He's not Googling, what do I do when things get out of control? And you and I, if it's just up to us, there's great reason to be fearful and to be nervous. And it's not that he doesn't care. Obviously, I think Jesus is going to answer this. But what if we could trust in the midst of it? For all of us in this room, we're just like the disciples. When we're facing the storm, we don't care how it ends. We just want it to what? Just end, right? And we would sell our faith sometimes, if we're just honest, if it would just end. If the relationship could get better, we'd walk away from Christianity, some of us at times. If the health could be improved, we'd walk away from God. If we're just honest this morning. The disciples would have done anything. They would have been looking for a new rabbi if it would have meant they could have escaped alive from the storm, I believe. But Jesus wants us to trust him. He wants something to be produced in us in regards to faith in him. He wants to build this in us, and he can't build it in my life or your life when everything's great. Let me say it again. He cannot build faith, the kind of God-honoring faith in our lives when everything's great. I'm not saying he's being cruel to you if you're in a situation. I'm just saying no matter where you find yourselves, health-wise, employment-wise, family-wise, relationally speaking, whether or not your housing situation is great or it's terrible, I'm not saying that he wants this for you. I'm just saying he wants to use it to produce faith in him. And he can't do that when everything's sunny. He just can't. He can't do it in my life. I've been challenged recently. We were going through a great season where we were seeing God's blessing in our adoption. And we were record crowds here at Epic, and people were making some life-altering decisions. And just to be honest, my confidence was huge during that time. And I'm not saying it wasn't in God at all, but I just, when things began to fall away in some of those areas, I just began to think, whoa, where was my confidence? Because in the good times, we think it's where? Of course it's in God. But sometimes if we're honest, it's in our circumstance. If we're honest. It says that, obviously, when the storm happened, the disciples, they were greatly afraid, right? As we would have been likely. But I want you to see something in verse 41. The wind has died down, the sea is now calm, and it says what in verse 41? And they were filled with great fear? Wait a minute. The storm is over. The sea is calm. In fact, the meaning there is dead calm. And they're filled with great fear. They initially were filled with fear because they met a storm that they couldn't overcome and didn't have any control over. And now they've just met a man who apparently isn't just a man. Right? They've just met a man who obviously isn't just a man. I mean, I assume none of you talk to the bay and it does what you tell it to. Because if so, I've got some ideas. And what's amazing is, it's a big miracle that Jesus made the wind stop. But all of us who've had any experience, and I haven't had much, but experience out on water or walking beside water or whatever, even when the wind stops, what do you still see the effects of? Don't the waves continue to crash? Do you know what this is telling us? That the moment the wind stopped, so did the waves. Psh. In verse 38, I believe it was, they said to him, they addressed him as teacher. In verse 41, they're no longer thinking they've just got a teacher on their hands. Right? What do they say to each other? Who is this? Who is this? And they're saying it to each other. They won't dare ask him. They're terrified of him, right? You know how when you want to answer from someone but you're scared of them, you ask somebody who may know something more, right? Like, you knew your mom wouldn't let you spend the night with a friend, but dad was soft. And so they're like, hey, dad, can you please get mom to... So they're just looking at each other and they're going, who is this? He speaks to the wind and it obeys him. He speaks to the waves and the sea. It obeys him. Who is this? It is the one who said in Matthew 28, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. It's a lot of authority in case you're curious. There may be some other places. I know some of you kind of, astrologer types. There's other places. But he's basically saying, all authority is mine. But he's not just a God of authority. He's a God of unmatched love. So he's got unmatched authority. He intermingles that with unmatched love. In fact, here's what Tim Keller says about this idea relating to this passage. It's a long one, but let me read it to you. It was helpful for me. Talking about Jesus, he writes that he lets things happen that I don't understand. He doesn't do things according to my plan or in a way that makes sense to me. But if Jesus is God, then he's got to be great enough to have some reasons to let you go through things you can't understand. His power is unbounded, but so are his wisdom and love. Nature is indifferent to you, but Jesus is filled with untamable love for you. If the disciples had really known that Jesus loved them, if they had really understood that he is powerful and loving, remember, unmatched power, authority, unmatched love, they would have not been scared. Their premise that if Jesus loved them, he wouldn't let bad things happen to them was wrong. He can love somebody and still let bad things happen to them because he is God, because he knows better than they do. Keller would go on to say, you can't have it both ways. You can't have it a God who's so powerful that you relate to, but yet has to explain things on your level. You can't have it both ways. He can't be that and have to come down to you. He just can't. And then it's great. It's brilliant. Now, this won't sound great grammatically, but I want to say it this way, just borrowing from the text. The disciples wouldn't have no faith forever, would they? These are going to be the men when Jesus leaves. These are going to be the men that are going to be responsible for the movement that you and I are sitting in 2,000 years later. These are going to be the men, though they didn't want to die on the lake that day, on the Sea of Galilee, these are going to be the men who are actually going to lay down their lives, die cruel deaths, when it could have been avoided if they just said they didn't have a clue who Jesus was. You should read about the way the disciples died. Fascinating. They wouldn't have no faith forever, and I hope the same is true for us. I hope God would build our faith no matter what the storm situation in our life is right now or whether it's calm. It won't be calm always. And the cross really is Jesus' greatest way he answers the do I care question, isn't it? Because remember this, because Jesus had all authority, if he only had all authority, he would have removed himself from the cross, just so we're clear. You with me? If he has authority over the wind and waves, he also has authority over the people that are trying to nail him to the cross. His authority alone would have removed him from the cross, but his unmatched love wouldn't allow his authority to win over. His unmatched love, not his authority, kept him there. But with that death and the subsequent resurrection, the greatest demonstration of authority ever, he's made a way for you and I to enter into this kingdom. In a moment, I'm going to pray. We'll enter into some more musical worship time as well as reflection, prayer time, and then you will be invited, for those of you who've trusted Jesus as Lord, Savior, King, you'll be invited to participate in communion this morning. So I'll pray, and then you'll be able to get up from your seat, or in no rush. You can stand and reflect and pray, sit, whatever, and then we'll kind of get out from our seats, and we'll make a line around that wall. You'll come through here. You receive the elements. Again, this is for those of you who've placed your faith in Jesus, or you're doing so this morning. It'll be a great moment. And so what I want to do is I want to set this moment up in the context of what we've been talking about today. So Jesus said this communion thing, do it in remembrance of me. When you think about my sacrifice, when you think about what I did for you, remember the bread represents his body that was broken on the cross for us, the cup representing his blood that was poured out for the forgiveness of our sins. And so with the analogy of the storm this morning, I want you to realize, and I want you to see and experience communion through this lens, Jesus throws himself into the storm for us. Jesus, we don't want the storm, but Jesus realizes for him to win our hearts and eternity with him, he's got to throw himself into the storm for our sake so that we might receive eternal calm or eternal peace with God. And what's amazing that he does with his authority on the cross, that day on the Sea of Galilee, what he did with his authority was say to the wind and waves, stop. On the cross, he says the same exact thing to our sin. Stop. Cease. You no longer have power over them. If you want to know what the heartbeat of Christianity is, it's this. It's this, that Jesus would speak to our sin upon the cross, that he would pay a ransom so that you and I might have this eternal peace like they had momentarily on the sea that day, that we might have it for eternity with God. And that he would speak to our sin in such a powerful way that, you know what, you don't have any power over him. And some of you are addicted to things right now you wish you'd never gotten addicted to. He's got power over that. And he doesn't just bring his power into the mix with that, he brings his love. Some of you are hopeless relationally this morning. Some of you are literally financially bankrupt. Some of you never think you'll get a job again. And I just want to say, I don't have any promises other than that he knows he has authority over it and he cares. I got nothing else to offer you, but I will give you that, and I think it could be enough. And if he doesn't do it for you in this life, he's made promises to in the life to come. And some of us can still just walk away this morning and go, it's just too good to be true. Maybe for you, Ben, not for me. Listen, I've faced my share of things, and I'm 25 years old, my mom dies, and I'm just like, what is up? And I don't want to be like the person that gets over there, everything's been awesome ever since. I can see God's plan. But he has been near. He has brought some beautiful things out of some ashes. I have learned to trust him. And I'm going to have a whole lot of more opportunities to do so, and so are you. Is it possible you and I have been making wrong conclusions about Jesus due to our circumstance? I want to pray. We go ahead and just bring the lights down. The band's going to come up. And what I want to do specifically is we pray into this communion time. I want to ask any of you who are facing any kind of storm right now, would you just stand that I might pray over you? Just go ahead and stand. I'm standing with you. I'm facing something. I need God to rescue and deliver. There's nothing magical about you standing right now, and nothing necessarily magical about my praying, but it is this kind of us voicing to God, God, I recognize I'm in the midst of a storm, but I also recognize you have unmatched authority and unmatched love, and I want to pray that God would do something great to bring peace even before the storm goes away. The disciples wanted one thing that day. It's what you want in your storm too. You just wanted to stop, but what if Jesus might produce something in us like he finally did with the disciples?